Welcome to Guerrilla Discipleship. I'm your host, Kevin Baker. It's a privilege to be with you. You know, here at Guerrilla Discipleship, our goal is to resource, inspire, encourage you to be an everyday disciple maker in the world that God's got you placed in the everyday experiences of your life. I've had the privilege recently of speaking to a group of other disciple makers, leaders, pastors, catalysts, about how we've transitioned or are in the process of transitioning Oakdale Church into a disciple-making community and basically using whatever God gives us to catalyze a disciple-making movement in the Washington, D.C. area. And so over the next 2 weeks, I'd like to share with you what I shared with them, just some things that we've learned. And so I'm appreciative of the opportunity to share this with you. So love that you're here with us, and ask that that you might let us know how this goes and whether any of these principles or learnings will help you. So let's go ahead and dive right in. All right, just a quick recap of how we got introduced to DMM. I am pastoring a legacy church in Maryland, and we were, in 2018, we became focused on disciple making. We didn't know anything about DMM, but we just knew that God was calling us to disciple making. At the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, one of our staff was doing some research that just coincidentally led her to Chris. She came to me and said, hey, some of us want to do a training where it feels like it's going to be life-changing training. So 30 of us here at the church went through the training, never been on Zoom before, January of 2020. By the time we finished the training, the pandemic was in place. And it was almost like God said, hey, you can't do what you normally did, but I just gave you a bunch of tools to do ministry in ways you didn't actually know about. So that's kind of our story. We've been working through DMM now for a little over 3 years. It has just been, well, the training was one paradigm shift after another, and it continues to be paradigm shift after paradigm shift. And so I just jotted down, I thought this was what you all asked of us, so I'm going to just give you a few things that I feel like we've learned. So here you go. Here's what we are learning, and I guess I would say we are currently learning this, but we have also begun to learn it. Remember in the paper game, where there was a line drawn that wasn't really necessary. So I think what we're realizing is be careful not to draw new lines. That the truth is we can do the same thing with DMM that we've done with legacy churches. We just say, oh, I see how Brent's doing it, and so I'm going to draw a line the way Brent's doing it or the way somebody else is doing it. There is something about drawing lines that gives us comfort and living in the, hey, God, help lead me every day, and let me make sure I'm listening to you directly. That I guess is just a little bit more effort than saying, well, I'm just going to do what Brent did or Susie did or Chris did or whatever. So I would say we're learning not to be careful not to draw new lines in DMM the same way that we may have drawn lines in legacy ministry before that. Chris has said, everybody has said this, but we have to let God tell us specifically what he wants us to do. When we first got trained, it kind of felt like, all right, well, Chris transitioned out of his church. I guess we need to transition out of our church. And so, you just begin to say, well, if I'm going to do this right, again, it's almost like drawing lines. I got to do what other people that are teaching me doing. And yet God just continued to press other things on us. And so we have tried to be as obedient as we can. And so I really want to say your elder team, your team, whoever your team is, to just continue to be in prayer and say, God, we don't want to duplicate what anybody else is doing unless that's what you want. We want to hear from you individually. That is some hard work, but it's great team building. I've seen God do amazing things through just allowing him to speak into us about what our unique mission is. I would say what surprised me the most about our particular situation is that God seems to have pressed us into MDM as much as he is to DMM. And I remember talking about MDM when we were in San Diego, and people were like, "What's MDM?" I swear I heard it here. It's mobilizing disciples to become disciple makers. It's mobilizing disciple makers, and DMM is creating disciple making movements. So, because the pandemic hit, we had nothing else to do with this congregation other than to say, "Hey guys, we can't meet together the way we normally did. So we want to train all of you to do discovery Bible studies, and we're going to invite all of you." We help them begin to figure out, how can you reach out to your family, your neighbors, your friends. And so God not only opened that door, but basically we just saw people grab hold of it. Now, again, it's not nothing's 100%, but it seems like what God has shown us is there is a lot of fruit in mobilizing the church. Again, maybe that's just unique to us. We're maybe others are seeing something different, but we are finding our way in mobilizing the disciple makers, or mobilizing the church to become disciple makers. And I think that's been going to be a critical part of creating a disciple making movement, is not just to move into new disciples, although I think we've got to do both. We've got to mobilize the church into disciple making, and we've got to go and get them into the world. I mean, that's one of our principles of the sales, right? Is to train up believers to go into the world. And so we've leveraged everything. I think when we first basically understood DMM, we were trying to figure out what to do with it. And God has just shown us that his desire for us right now is to leverage everything about who we are into disciple making. I would say we've moved from attractional to fractional. And the idea is we no longer care. And believe it or not, I'm just amazed. Our board has we took the board through this training after the staff got it. They've embraced disciple making movement concepts. We're no longer building our castle. We're trying to figure out how to build God's kingdom. And that's an interesting place to be. So by what I mean by fractional is, hey, we're saying, hey, you got to go out. It's reshaped how we do Sunday morning. Sunday morning is no longer an attraction. It's the family coming together and basically saying, this is the time to refill, get equipped, share stories, encourage each other, because we're going right back out again after this time of gathering, and we're going to keep making disciples. So we're sending people out in sort of a fractional way instead of getting everybody to try and come here. God has been teaching us. If I go too fast, just tell me. I'm trying to get through this so we can get in our groups. But God has been teaching us in many ways the power of micro shifts. When you're teaching people just for knowledge, I think that's one thing. Teaching people to obey takes us slowing things down. We learn obedience in probably smaller ways than what we have done in terms of telling concepts. We can get big concepts across to people. But if you're trying to get people to obey, there's a book, I read some of it, called Atomic Habits. And so he talks about the multiplying out of small changes. And we've taken that to heart in terms of teaching people to obey, that they're probably not going to go from where they are to where God wants them to be overnight. Hey, neither did I. But the truth is, if we help them see micro shifts that they can make in their behavior, micro shifts that they can make in their week, it really has helped them, because that way they actually feel like, hey, I'm moving forward. I can see what I can do next. I can see the way to move through this, instead of feeling like it's just an overwhelming task. Part of that, this is all part of what God is doing in terms of mobilizing disciple makers, is that you have to fight the whirlwind. The whirlwind is always a problem for us, even if you're outside of the legacy church. The whirlwind is all that other stuff that takes up time in your schedule that you think, I ought to get to something, but I can't because, man, I've got too much stuff to do. We all know, if you've been a part of a legacy church, hey, legacy churches create stuff to do. And so fighting the whirlwind is an ongoing battle in order to get practicing and being a practitioner of what God is doing. And the other thing that I would say is if you're staying in the legacy church or God's got you working in a legacy church, it is a constant battle to fight against the drift back toward what we know culturally. I really think that's one of the biggest issues or one of the biggest reasons to stay in ongoing coaching. If we don't keep reminding ourselves and seeing new ways to practice what we've learned and getting reinforcements in that, then everything we've been enculturated in Christian culture will just keep slipping back in. So it's a battle. You have to keep fighting it. It's a battle worth fighting, but it keeps going. One of the things that has amazed me about disciple making in the way that God's deployed it here in our setting is culture change. I mean, I can't remember who said this. You all know this. Culture change eats strategy for lunch. If you want to change the culture in your life or in your team, culture change comes best when it's peers influencing peers. One of the best things that we did was when my staff said, Kevin, put a microphone up on the platform and let people tell their stories of what God's doing as they're making disciples. Anybody who's been the pastor of a legacy church knows you never put a microphone up unscripted and let crazy people come up and talk in your service. That's church 101. And so I was scared to death, but we did it. And oh my goodness, has that done more? Because they write us all off as pastors and leaders and say, well, you can do that, but I could never do that. But when the guy sitting next to them in the pew stands up and says, here's what happened in my school, or here's how I did this, here's how I began to invite someone, and they see them. I mean, we have people seriously trembling at the microphone. They're shaking. They're so nervous. And because they never gotten up before and said anything, and they just stand up in the service. That's right. It's what happens in the sauna stays in the sauna. But you start hearing, hey, that makes sense to me. I could do that. It doesn't come off so professional. It doesn't have that expert tie to it. It just has the authenticity of I didn't know what to do. And we've had a lot of people sharing their mistakes. Man, nothing encourages progress like people being authentic and saying, I didn't get it right the first time. And then just encourages, I think, that atmosphere where I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to get this right the first time, but God can still use me in the middle of all that. So if you want to change the culture, just helps us to have ideas and it sparks something in us that's like, oh man, I didn't even think about, doing that with folks. All right. Thank you so much for being with us today on Guerrilla Discipleship. I hope you've enjoyed listening to what we began there today. As I said, we're going to finish this next week. So thank you for letting us be a resource for you in your own thinking about being a disciple maker and the way that God is using you. As always, you can email me, kbaker@oakdale.church, or you can comment to us below. Let us know how we can help and serve you better. Thanks so much for being a part of Guerrilla Discipleship.